What's up, guys? It's me, Zimzilla. I am finally back after so long, coming back at you with another video. This is going to be a one still video. It's going to be a commentary. I'm not going to be doing a lot of editing. This is more just a talk, just so I can get something out there, because, you know, college and all that stuff. So, I'm going to be doing a commentary on LivingCorpseX in his latest video. Enjoy. Now, I'm going to be doing my commentary on LivingCorpseX. Of course, everyone probably knows LivingCorpseX, 3.3k YouTuber, big guy who did all the Godzilla, Kaiju Battle Royale videos, and the video he did posted last night was, does Godzilla have a monopoly on the Kaiju genre in the West? Now, this is a more community-related rant, I should say, that he's done. And he's done a few more, like, I think everyone knows now, his famous Godzilla's great, but his fans suck, or I care less and less about the Kaiju genre and stuff like that. And overall, like, I watched the video all the way through last night. I watched it through twice, and all I have to say is that I think it's really nothing more than a ploy for him to do another video talking about how much he hates other kaiju fans in the current time, because he's like, I think Godzilla has a monopoly on the kaiju genre, which really doesn't make a lot of sense. I mean, even his co-host, if we can call him that, his co-host said that it's not really a monopoly, which it isn't. It's just, well, I'll get into that anyway. And he's like, it was like, I was watching it pretty, just kind of, I was doing something else at the time. I was doing something for my own series, and I hear him say, well, it's more or less the fans' fault. And that's when I actually started taking notes, and I was like, you know what, I gotta do a commentary on this. And pretty much a lot of it comes down to assumptions, where it's like, oh, I see a lot of people say that they only watch stuff for Godzilla, or a lot of misinformed fans think certain monsters are Godzilla monsters because Godzilla is really popular. And I'm gonna go over a lot of research I did, and let's just deconstruct this video. So he brings up a lot of different series. We'll just start off with the basics. We've got Godzilla. He's the standard kaiju that everyone knows and loves, most famous. He talks about Pacific Rim. Pacific Rim is the new IP coming out, Pacific Rim Uprising, which I'm going to be doing another trailer analysis of very soon. But I'm very excited for Pacific Rim Uprising. A lot of people have been having issues with designs and stuff and all like that, but I personally love the new Pacific Rim Jaeger designs, and I really think this is going to be an awesome film. And then we've got King Kong. King Kong is probably one of the oldest monsters that he mentions, and King Kong was pretty popular back in the day. Obviously helped propel Godzilla into popularity, and that's what we got. We got the Showa series, and then Godzilla just kept on growing and growing, and there we are today. And now we've got Ultraman. Ultraman was created after Godzilla, and really what propelled Ultraman was after the success of their other series, Ultra Q. Subaraya and Subaraya Productions wanted to create another series which is more focused on a hero. And originally it was going to be a monster being the main hero, but then they decided to make it a more humanoid character, which is how Ultraman came to be, as well as that's also the origins behind the monster Bemular, as a creature by the name of Bemular was going to be the hero monster of the story. He also brings up a few other characters and movies and series, such as Aegon the Atomic Dragon, Pulgasari, and the Host, which are all Korean. Yonguri and Reptilian, also Korean, and Reigo. He didn't mention Reigo, but Reigo's a monster from Japan. He brings up Zone Fighter. Zone Fighter was kind of like Toho's answer to Ultraman, and Zone Fighter only got one series, and we'll get into that later. And he also mentions the one solo film, Colossal, which Colossal, I heard it was pretty good, but there was no theaters around where I live that were showing Colossals, so that kind of sucks. And we also have Ready Player One, which was going to come out, and although we aren't going to see Ultraman and Mechagodzilla, which are in the book version of Ready Player One, that's kind of sad, but we should have seen those in Ready Player One when Ready Player One comes out. And then for anime, the closest things that he mentions to kaiju are Evangelion. However, when it comes to anime and kaiju don't really blend too much, as I think more mecha anime is probably more common when it comes to big things fighting each other. And when people think of monsters, they either think Pokemon, Digimon, and to a lesser extent for games, Monster Hunter. And he talks about how King Kong made Godzilla, and now they're using Godzilla to bring back King Kong's popularity. But we should explore the timeline when it comes to King Kong. And he even answers his own question as to why King Kong is being promoted by Godzilla. And it's because Godzilla is just easier to attain, because the Toho execs really care about Godzilla, as well as they have the full rights to their character, unlike King Kong, which, like he says later on in his video, is a legal nightmare to get. And we should understand that King Kong's first film, obviously 1933, he had his sequels with Sada Kong, and then the spiritual successor of Mighty Joy Young. But the second film that King Kong actually appeared in was in 1962. So yeah, 1933 to 1962 is a very large leap in terms of years. And then, of course, we had Godzilla, who had gotten his first film in 54, his second film in 55, and then didn't come back until 62. And then after King Kong vs. Godzilla, we had a show, a King Kong show, which was from 1966 to 1969. And while that was going on, Godzilla ran from 62 to 75. And then, of course, in 1967, we had King Kong Escape. So while that show was still going on in America, we had King Kong Escapes in 67. And then from 67 to 87, we had another show. Actually, no, I should take that back. Not another show. 67 and 86 were both remakes of King Kong, while 86 technically is King Kong Lives, so I should correct that. And then there was another show in 98, 2000, and then in 2006 there was a web series. And then, of course, we all know Godzilla came back in 89. So when it comes to King Kong had a much wider disperse of what was content that was being distributed by anyone for that matter, because King Kong Escapes was in Japan, the show was in America. The two films in 67 and 86 were, or 76 and 86 were both in America, and then you get a series in 98, 2000, 2006 were all in America, but they were so spread out, and not to mention the fact that King Kong is, once again, very hard to get. It's just really hard to do that. While Godzilla was pretty consistent in terms of what was being distributed out throughout all these years, as well as Godzilla was being shown in both Japan and in America, while we don't really know what was going on when it came to the distribution of King Kong related material in both Japan, America, and the world in general. And he also talks, I should also bring up the fact that, he complains that people only watch older kaiju films with monsters in them because they appeared later on in Godzilla movies. I would like you to show some evidence to support that, because that's a big assumption and very disingenuous to anyone who probably watches older films, because you think, oh, I only watched them because a monster was in it from Godzilla. I mean, I have a lot of the older Godzilla films, which were awesome, like Destroy All Monsters, and a lot of those movies had, Destroy All Monsters in particular, had Baragon, Varan, of course Mothra, Rodan, and all those monsters had their own single films, and I bought them because I wanted to see what the monster was in their own film. Personally, I will say that for myself, and people I talked to have said the same, I bought the film because of the monster, while you're assuming that people only watch these films because, oh, it was a Godzilla monster at one point, and you're kind of inputting your own personal bias against fans in that whole perspective. And let's just get into the fact that Godzilla's second and third films were from 55 and 62. Now, overall, Toho had produced 149 films between 55 and 62 and distributed 15. And in terms of films that had monsters or were sci-fi related, in general, there was Half Human in 55, Rodan was in 56, the Mothra was in 61, Varan was in 58, the Mysterians was in 57, H-Man was in 58, and Battle in Outer Space was 59. And let's also get into the fact that right after King Kong vs. Godzilla took place, Gorath came out in 62, the same year, and then Atragon and Midtangle came out in 63, respectively. And let's just go on to the topic of Gamera, because they do talk about Gamera getting his own film, and they've already done a video on it. And Gamera came out in 65 and ran from 65 to 71, and then Gamera the Super Monster came out in 1980, and it was 15 years after that when the first Gamera movie came out in Guardian of the Universe, and then it was 7 years after that did we get Gamera the Brave. And not to mention the fact that Gamera, let's be honest with everyone, he even admits this himself that Gamera was viewed as a ripoff to Godzilla, but let's also take into account the fact that if you compare a lot of the older Gamera movies to the older Godzilla movies, Godzilla overall had better quality, which quality is something very important that he does bring up later. And let's just talk about Pacific Rim for a second. Pacific Rim came out in 2003, and it actually aired during G-Fest, so a lot of people who went to G-Fest saw it and talked about it from G-Fest. Not to mention the fact that Pacific Rim was also around and kind of spawned its own fan base based on the internet reception it got, as well as a little bit to do with anime in general, which I'll get into in a little bit. And he also talks about how Gorgo never got a sequel. We should also take into account the fact that the people who worked on Gorgo were also people who had worked a little bit between the Giant Behemoth from 59 and the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms from 53. All those films, despite the fact that they're different monsters, they all had a slight connection, as in certain members of all those teams started working with each other, and that kind of led to, like, each film led to one another, because Beast is more direct kind of predecessor, and the Behemoth is kind of a, you could say, a spiritual successor to the Beast from 20,000 Fathoms, and Gorgo is what the Behemoth was to the Beast, as well as Gorgo got a comic too. So Gorgo got some popularity, but I think the main reason why a lot of people don't give other Kaiju IPs a chance is because a lot of Kaiju IPs try to capitalize on Godzilla. Because if you look at Gorgo, you look at Rego, you look at Aegon, and to a lesser degree Pulgasari and a few others, they look very similar to Godzilla. You've got giant reptilian monster, spikes down the back, probably has some kind of beam attack, they destroy cities. And not to mention the fact that these films also come from a very lower quality than Godzilla. What are you going to want? Something that's very similar to Godzilla, but of a lower quality, or just Godzilla that everyone knows? So let's just talk about Godzilla here later on, leading up to 2014. We, of course, had Godzilla 2000, which came out in 1999. I'm going to be going by the Japanese releases of these films. It was Godzilla 2000, and then Mega Garrison 2000. We had a film in 2001, of course, GMK 2002, and then 2003 was the Kyoryu duology. We should also mention the fact that during the events, or the year leading up to Tokyo SOS when it was being released, they re-released pretty much all, or most I should say, of the Showa films, such as Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, Godzilla vs. Gigan, Godzilla vs. Hedorah, Godzilla vs. Sea Monster, Son of Godzilla. And then they also re-released some of the films like Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla, Giant Monsters All Attack, Godzilla vs. Megaguirus. All those were being re-released. And this was also at the height of the Bandai Movie Monster series that was in Japan, and it was also at the height of the Bandai Creation line that was being released in America. And aside from the fact that Toho had 10 films produced between Tokyo SOS and Against Mechagodzilla, they still released another Godzilla film because money. And then Godzilla 2000 came out in 2004. So I'd say the popularity for Godzilla during the early 2000s up till now is due to the result of the massive marketing that Toho was producing to lead up to Tokyo SOS and to a lesser degree Final Wars. I do say to a lesser degree Final Wars because in terms of Godzilla content that was getting released, almost anything that was getting re-released was in preparation for Tokyo SOS, as well as the internet itself, which was growing significantly, was buzzing about the new Godzilla film that was coming out, and then there was less and less rumors that were spread about Final Wars. However, there was the official Final Wars website that had come out, but it didn't really release anything significant, unlike leading up to Tokyo SOS's release, which helped get Tokyo SOS a lot of recognition. And of course, I should say this, the Bandai Creation line had been running significantly during this time, so it included Series 1, 2, and 3, and then in Series 4 was the Final Wars line that came out after Final Wars came out. And then Series 1 had Burning Godzilla, Godzilla 1954, Gigan, and Rainbow Mothra. And we should also take into account that Rainbow Mothra had never appeared in a Godzilla movie. That was from Rebirth of Mothra. It was Showa Gigan, and Gigan had not been in a film since '72, which helped spark interest in that film, which was also being released at the time. And we had Burning Godzilla, which there was the duo set with Godzilla vs. Destroyer and Godzilla vs. Space Godzilla that was pretty common in a lot of stores such as Circuit City, Best Buy at the time. And we also had the original 54 Godzilla, which was either something you could find as a standalone, very common, or you could get it in the box set, which included Godzilla King of the Monsters, Godzilla's Revenge, Terror of Mechagodzilla, Godzilla vs. Mothra, and the original Rodan. And then after that, in the Series 2, we had Space Godzilla, Mechagodzilla 2, GMK Godzilla, and King Ghidorah, the GMK version. All films that each of these characters appeared in, aside from Space Godzilla, had gotten re-releases. And that would be Godzilla vs. Mechagodzilla 2 and GMK, were two of the films that were getting re-releases during this time. And then, of course, the Movie Monster series had a lot of the other figures that you couldn't get from the Bandai Creation line. And almost any kind of mainstream comic store, for my own admission up here in Newberry Comics, was getting kind of popular at the time, and they, along with the Ultraman Movie Monster line, was getting released in their stores. So if you wanted to get Mecha King Ghidorah, for example, which was something that wasn't part of the Bandai Creation line, it was actually a pretty common figure that you could buy at a comic store that was more mainstream. However, there are obviously quite a few comic stores you can get that aren't like business chains and stuff like that, which sold the Movie Monster line. And I should also mention the fact that the Gamera films were getting released by ADV at the time, which were less common. You could get them in places like Best Buy. However, I found that places like Circuit City, Tower of Records, and Blockbuster were not selling those films, so it depended on what stores you went to get Gamera films. But we should also mention the fact that it was a lot of stores were releasing the Gamera Movie Monster line, which had Showa Gamera, the Hyper Gauss, Gamera from Gamera the Brave, which was getting released, as well as the Gamera 3. All those figures were getting released alongside the Movie Monster series line for Godzilla. And if you went on any sites that were selling these pretty commonly, it would go Godzilla and then any of the Gamera figures, because there was only like 5 Gamera figures in that line were getting sold with Godzilla figures. And once again, he says that Godzilla has a monopoly on the genre. Well, Gamera had not been in a film since 71, and if you want to count Gamera the Super Monster, then 1980. And none of those films had, well, I should say, very few of those films saw American releases, and Super Monster never got an American release. And it wasn't until the Heisei series where Gamera started to be taken seriously. And even in Gamera Revenge of Iris, that took place in 1999, the same year as Godzilla 2000, they didn't even try to get it overseas in America, while Godzilla 2000 got an American release, because Toho decided, oh yeah, let's talk with some companies and do it, which they were with TriStar at the time, while the people working on Gamera decided not to. And that's the issue with Kadokawa, is that Kadokawa does sit on a lot of IPs, they just don't touch them. Even though Gamera and Gauss were both lent to City Shroud and Shadow, which is good for them. However, Kadokawa doesn't like to take a lot of risk. Well, I should say a lot of Japanese companies don't like to take a risk. But I should also mention that when it comes to movies that were being released in the 2000s, the early 2000s, for example, monster movies that were released in the West, there was obviously Jurassic Park 3, which was in 2001, Cloverfield was released in 2008, Slither in 2008, The Wendigo was in 2001, Dragon Wars in 2007, Infestation in 2009, there was the Peter Jackson King Kong film, which he says that it was going to get a trilogy or a sequel or something. No, it wasn't. That was a April Fool's joke that Peter Jackson made, and it did get a lot of awards. However, it was built up, it was expected to get as much money and revenue as The Lord of the Rings, but it did not do as well as Lord of the Rings, which is one of the reasons why, even if they were proposing a sequel, that is the main reason why it just did not gain as much appeal. And despite the fact that I love the film, for a general audience, there are very, very slow bits in that film, and it's not constant action, even though it does have a lot of good action scenes, and there's a lot of parts cut out from the film to begin with. It's just, to a regular audience, it was not as well received in that regard. There was also the Call of Cthulhu in 2005, Alien vs. Predator in 2004, and then there was the third and fourth Tremor films from 2001 and 2004 respectively. And we should make a note that when it came to Godzilla 2014, there was a lot of hype towards a new Godzilla film that was going to get released. I mean, there was the Godzilla 3D IMAX film that there was a rumor spreading about that being released in America, and that ran from around 2007 to 2009, and that was off the hype of Godzilla Final Wars that people were getting copies of, because that was also released in the same line that Tokyo SOS and all those other films were getting released with. So Godzilla was obviously still in people's minds, and people wanted to see an American film, even though 98 came out, and I'll get to 98 later on. But Godzilla finally got there was finally talk of a script in 2012, and it finally came out in 2004. So there was just good timing year-wise for people when they were thinking about what was on Godzilla. And I should also make note that if you were 5 when Godzilla 2000 came out, you were around 19 when 2014 came out. If you were 20, you were 34. And if you were just born, you were 14. I should say that because around 99, there was a lot of people who started getting interest in Godzilla, because a lot of people who talk about Godzilla now, the only films they've seen are the 2014 film, maybe the 98 film, and some of the newer Millennium films. So there was a big resurgence of newer fans that have grown. I mean, not everyone talks about Godzilla, but if you go to a lot of different sites, I say this because the sites I would source would be DeviantArt, Toho Kingdom, any Facebook group, any other kind of forum that you can go to, Wikizilla, another good example. They all have a lot of fans who are very new to the franchise and are just getting into Godzilla. So a lot of them are probably very young when they saw 2014, or of an average age, because I mean, if you were a middle-aged person when 2000 came out, you're much older now. And he also talked about, oh yeah, I don't want to see a Pacific Rim Godzilla crossover, even though Legendary is trying to get as much profit out of this as they can and wanting to hype up everything. I should mention that Pacific Rim did benefit a lot from anime. I will say that because Sword Art Online, which is probably one of the biggest anime releases in back in the day, because around my high school time, SAO was released in 2012. It got a lot of appeal, and it sort of blew up the anime genre as it is today. And we also had Attack on Titan that was released in 2003. And Pacific Rim's aesthetic, as well as its characters, lent very well to people who liked anime. And a lot of people who, from my own experience and other people I talk to online, if they like Pacific Rim, they usually like anime more. And I have not put a lot of research into why there's not a lot of connections between kaiju and anime. I mean, I like anime, so I mean, I'm an exception to this rule. However, I just don't understand that, but it's probably because mecha genre is more common in anime than there is monsters, so that's probably why. And as a result, Pacific Rim got a lot of its fans from anime fans who saw Pacific Rim as a somewhat faithful, as you could say, representation of anime in a live-action setting. And then he also talks about how Daiei, Tsuburaya Productions, and Toho, and how Toho was helping Tsuburaya Productions, but they weren't helping Daiei, even though Daiei had proposed a Gamera vs. Godzilla film. The fact is that Daiei wanted to cash in on the idea of a giant monster series, which is why they made Gamera, and then they became direct rivals with Toho. So if they did make a Gamera vs. Godzilla film, they would be splitting profits between two companies, and Toho being a much larger company and being one of the top 3 producers of film and television and movies and all that in Japan, they have no reason to split profits with a much smaller company like Daiei, which is why Toho refused multiple times. And unlike Tsuburaya Productions was producing television, and even though they produce movies, their main focus was television, and because their main character was a Ultraman, or like a hero-looking character, it doesn't break away from Godzilla, who is the monster hero or monster anti-hero. So overall, Ultraman's aesthetic is different from Godzilla's, which means is that there's a lot of crisscross in terms of fans liking them. However, it's not like one is trying to outdo the other. And we should also mention the fact that even though Toho did lend Subaraya Productions a lot of their suits as well as a lot of help, they did have a falling out, which would be after Subaraya's death. And because of that, that is what led to Subaraya Productions pushing further and further away from Toho. And I'd say it was for the better, because I should also mention that during the events of Tokyo SOS's release and then after Final Wars' release, Ultraman was getting a lot of traction online, especially during YouTube's early conception, because Ultraman Mebius, which is probably one of the more famous Ultraman to the common Kaiju goer, from the early 2000s, came out in 2006, and then the Monster Focus series Ultra Galaxy and Ultra Galaxy Neo were both released in 2007 and 2008, which is, once again, 2006, 2007, 2008, right off the heels of Godzilla Final Wars, and this was during a time where a lot of Godzilla content was being released on YouTube, and there was a lot of tributes, AMVs, stuff like that was being released for Ultra Galaxy and Ultramans more specifically. And that's what got quite a few people into Ultraman. However, because Ultraman was not getting released as Godzilla was, which was to a mainstream audiences, to multiple different distributors and common stores, I will say, however, Ultraman is doing better in that regard, because a lot of series such as Ultraman Max and Ultraman Mebius are able to be streamed on Crunchyroll and other anime sites. And even Ultraman Geed is getting released on Crunchyroll at this current time. And speaking of another reason why Godzilla's been really popular as of late is because, aside from the Godzilla movie, Pacific Rim helped hype up Godzilla because it was another monster movie, and people thought to themselves, wow, look at the CGI on that. If CGI is so good for Pacific Rim, it's probably going to be even better for Godzilla, which is getting even more time to be released. And then there was the 2 mobile Godzilla games, and then there was obviously the Godzilla PS4 game that was released. So, Godzilla was just, overall, Toho has been much more smarter with their marketing, and they actually decided to take somewhat more risks than Daiei, and even Subaraya. Subaraya does take risks, however, Ultraman at this current point is more popular than Godzilla, despite the fact that Shin Gojira did get praised heavily in Japan. I consider that more to do with Godzilla, this Godzilla film, appealing more to the Japanese peoples, and I draw this because of a lot of scenes, as well as Godzilla's representation as a whole, call back to recent Japanese disasters, and in the end, of course, the military defeats Godzilla and the people win, and I think that more speaks to the Japanese people's willingness to not give up, as well as their will as a people and the belief in their government to push through, which, due to Japan's very respectful and honor-based society, I think that is why a lot of people enjoyed that film heavily, because it was marketed towards the Japanese and not towards a wider audience, which I think was for the good. And going on to marketing, he talks about how they should market Gamera, get him his own film, then they go into some Gamera wank about Gamera beating Godzilla and King Kong, which I don't get, despite him cross-referencing Heisei and Showa sources, and then melding them together into another Gamera altogether, which is what Screw Attack did, but hey, I mean, he should know better, because he's a actual, he's not a Kaiju YouTuber, he is a entertainer on YouTube. But overall, the reason I believe that even the MonsterVerse, as marketed as it is, and as talked about as it is, has not been getting as much recognition in terms of branding as well as commercials and stuff, is due to 98. And I know a lot of people are going to be like, oh wow, you're going to be talking about 98 again? Really? You're really going to wank off 98 again and how bad 98 is? The fact is that 98 had a ton of different books, a lot of merchandise, a lot of toys, and commercials. Like, there was a lot of commercials and a lot of posters, billboards. 98 had a big marketing team that worked on a lot of aspects to bring 98 and Godzilla back into the American scene after Godzilla vs. Destroyer in 95. And even though it did make a lot of money, it's probably one of the highest grossing Godzilla films, which a lot of fans try to say is, oh wow, 98 was good because it made a lot of money. I chalk that up due to the fact that they were expecting a Godzilla film, and what they got was a very simple generic monster film. And even though it made a lot of tickets, in terms of the marketing and the toys and all that, it did not make up that profit that they wanted to get. And as a result, I believe that even though people were skeptical about 2014, everyone was skeptical. However, even though people said that it was said that, oh, they're sticking closer to the original Godzilla, people started getting more and more invested, and sure enough, we see a more traditional looking Godzilla. We have his powers, his abilities, all of that is represented very well in 2014. It's not the classic Godzilla, but is a good adaptation for an American audience, and a lot of people were happy with that. And a lot of young people who had not seen a Godzilla film since probably 1999 or 1998, or probably never seen a Godzilla film in general, unless maybe it was on TV or something, got to see a new, updated, very modernized Godzilla, which is good for them. And, of course, now we have a little bit more Kaiju content that is being released by other parties, such as the Project Nemesis books, which I have read the books, I enjoy the books. However, not a lot of people read nowadays, and I'd say books sadly have dropped off because of the internet and audiobooks and stuff like that, and a lot of people aren't buying hard copies of books, which I'd say I'm sad to see, but it's just a product of the times. There's obviously City Shrouded in Shadows, which has a lot of different mecha and kaiju, because Gamera, Gauss, Godzilla, King Ghidorah, Ultraman, Fake Ultraman / Zerab is in the game. And I'd say that's pretty good, except the fact is that that game has not been released outside of Japan, and only people who have locked consoles or Japanese YouTubers are promoting that game. However, of course, he's promoted it, and a few other people have, but I mean, we're not going to be able to play it unless City Shrouded in Shadows does get a localization in America. It gets some kind of Demon Souls-esque treatment. And then on another note, he does make a comparison where he's like, oh, well, there's a lot of Dracula films, but there's even more vampire films. I should also mention that a lot of Dracula stories stay very close to the original, which is another issue with King Kong. King Kong stays very close to its sources. And aside from the web series and TV shows it's gotten, any big budget movies aside from King Kong vs. Godzilla and King Kong Escapes were either reimagines or remakes of the original 1933 story. While unlike Dracula gets the same treatment as King Kong, as opposed to other series like Underworld, which took the idea of vampires and expanded upon it. And even, as much as I don't want to say it, even Twilight had vampires and werewolves in it, but it didn't follow the same story as Dracula or the Wolfman. It's its own thing, despite it being Twilight. And I would say that he even answers his own question. Why does Godzilla have a quote-unquote monopoly of the the genre? It's because companies don't have faith in another IP, so they make a bad product and they blame the audience for not liking the product. And, well, he, in a way, this kind of upset me a little bit where he talks about, he mentioned Mr. H reviews and how he did a Kaiju Files Explained, and how he mentioned his Godzilla Files Gamera, and it's like the last Gamera film was in 2006, and I was very adamant about looking for that Gamera film, and I actually had to go into Boston to pick it up from a comic store. And even though I bought all the ADV Gamera films from the Heisei era at a local Best Buy that was closer to my house, and even though some of the older Gamera films were common, they still did not have all the Gamera films by a single company being distributed, which, what it comes down to, basically, is that Godzilla is more focused with its marketing. Godzilla's owned by a company it's been the same company for so long. They marketed him throughout the Showa era consistently up until 75. They brought him back in 89. They took some time. Then they had a whole series of films with the exact same continuity that they followed. They were adamant about it being its own series. And with Mothra, they were like, oh, well, there's a lot of popularity in bringing back one of the big five. And the big five being Godzilla, King Ghidorah, Mothra, Rodan, and Mechagodzilla. and all of those kaiju all came into the Heisei era, and Mothra, probably being the second most popular kaiju, got her own series, and that series wasn't even released in America, and neither was the Heisei era. And then after Godzilla vs. Destroya, we got Godzilla 1998 for America, which was supposed to carry on for a little bit and get its own material, which, of course, that didn't happen. We did get the animated series, which was more faithful due to writers and a lot of people working on the series who liked Godzilla more than Roland Emmerich and Dean Devlin. And then we got Godzilla 2000, and as such, we got the Millennium Era. And then because of the internet and Godzilla 3D IMAX being rumored, and then the script for 2014 being rumored in 2012, there was always rumors and there was always content to theorize and discuss about on the internet, as opposed to Gamera, which had very little content from 99 to 2006, and both the Heisei series and the Gamera the Brave movie being very inaccessible to the common person. If you really wanted to look for them, you had to dig or go to other like cities and stuff to go find that stuff. And then Ultraman, despite people liking Ultraman, was not marketed outside of America because, well, it was focused for Japanese audiences and for Japanese television, despite the fact that a lot of series such as Mebius, Ultra Galaxy were getting clips taken from the shows onto YouTube, which sparked a lot of interest in Ultraman in the younger generation from the early 2000s, I should say. And that's what kind of got Ultraman's popularity, and a lot of older people got younger people into Ultraman. And as a result, Super 8 Productions got its own YouTube channel, and now it promotes Ultraman Gi pretty heavily on its YouTube channel. And it's very popular in Japan still, and probably still more popular than Godzilla, despite Shin Godzilla's success. While King Kong has not been in many films and not a lot of shows that were very common to people nowadays, and the same thing is true for Gamera, and really any other kaiju series is either trying to capitalize off of Godzilla's appearance or Godzilla tropes and does not try to experiment. Well, things like Project Nemesis are very successful, and they do stick with tropes, but they do not try to stay very close to Godzilla. They're their own thing, and that's good for them. Same thing can be applied to Pacific Rim. However, I chalk that up to more because of its aesthetic and its visuals helped promote 2014 even more, and it did resonate a lot with the anime community after both Sword Art Online and Attack on Titan being very popular, and its aesthetic resonating more with anime fans than traditional kaiju fans. And that's pretty much all I've got to say about this rant of mine, or commentary. Let's call it a commentary. I wouldn't have made this a video. However, I think I should also make this very clear that this video, I had seen other videos that Living Corpse had done. It was more directed at the fact that I've seen in any video he talks negatively about Godzilla, he always mentions the fans, and I think that still comes down to the fact that he still holds a grudge against Nerfman and what happened with that drama. And I remember, personally, I had said a joke or something, and then he got mad about it, and then I started commenting on some of his content. However, I noticed that, oh wow, none of my comments are actually coming up, so I realized, oh, he had blocked me. So, I mean, I don't really care if he blocks me or not. He can do whatever he wants. But I think that him blaming the fans for lack of information, as well as building off of the hype of, like, since 1999 when it came to Godzilla, and saying, oh, it's because of the fans there's a Godzilla monopoly. Well, it's because Toho was better with their marketing, and they have a kaiju that's not a legal nightmare that they don't sit on. It's simple as that. They're a better company, and they treat their product a lot better than other companies do. So it's not the fans' fault, and you having a grudge against certain people who ask you for stuff on your channel, or other people who did rants on you, any stuff that has to do with the fans, that's not their fault, and you shouldn't be blaming them for your own little grudge, and then translate that to, oh, this is why such and such is wrong with the world, and blah blah blah. It's stupid. But that's all. See you guys later.